Aristotle, one of history's greatest minds, writes about unicorns like they're as real as horses. Julius Caesar tells his soldiers to watch out for them in the German forests. Medieval kings spend fortunes buying unicorn horns, convinced they'll save them from poison. We look back at these people and think, how could they believe in something so obviously fake? But here's the thing, they weren't stupid. They weren't gullible. They had reasons, evidence even, for believing unicorns were out there somewhere in the world. So let's figure out what really happened. What were they actually seeing? And why did this belief last for nearly 2,000 years? Our story starts in ancient Greece, around 400 BCE. A Greek physician named Theseus spent 17 years working at the Persian royal court. When he finally came home, he brought back stories from the edges of the known world. And one of those stories was about a creature from India. According to Theseus, this animal looked like a wild ass, about the size of a horse. It had a white body, a purple head, bright blue eyes, and here's the kicker, a single horn growing right out of its forehead. He claimed that if you made a drinking cup from that horn, it could protect you from poison and even epilepsy. Now, was Theseus making this up? Probably not. He was writing what he thought was serious natural history, based on what travelers and Persian officials had told him. In his mind, he was documenting real animals from distant lands, just like any explorer would today. And people believed him. Within a few decades, Aristotle himself mentioned this one-horned creature in his works. For the Greeks, this wasn't fantasy or mythology. This was science. The unicorns sat right alongside lions and elephants in their encyclopedias of the natural world. Fast forward to the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar added his own sighting report. While writing about his wars in Gaul, he described a one-horned creature that looked like a deer, living in the forests of Germania. Pliny the Elder, Rome's most famous naturalist, catalogued not just one but several types of one-horned animals. He wrote about the rhinoceros and something called the orsus, which supposedly had a horse's body, elephant's feet, a boar's tail, and a single black horn. Think about that for a moment. These weren't campfire stories. These were detailed descriptions appearing in scholarly texts, written by people considered the leading experts of their time. These books would be copied, studied, and treated as definitive references for the next 1,000 years. So what were they really looking at? This is where it gets interesting, because the answer tells us a lot about how humans make sense of things we've never seen before. The most likely explanation for many unicorn sightings? The Indian rhinoceros. When you see a rhino from the side, especially from a distance, it looks like it only has one horn. The second, smaller horn doesn't show up in profile. Now imagine you're an ancient trader walking the routes through India and Persia. You hear locals talking about this massive creature with a horn. Maybe you catch a glimpse of one from far away. Maybe you see a crude drawing. By the time you get back to Greece or Rome and tell the story, details have changed. Memories have blurred. Other people have added their own bits. What comes out the other end is something that sounds like a unicorn. Then there's the Arabian oryx. This beautiful antelope has two long, perfectly straight horns. But here's the thing, when you look at it from the side, those horns line up so perfectly that it looks like there's only one. Ancient art from Mesopotamia and Egypt shows oryx in profile all the time, and in those images, you see what looks like a single-horned animal. Some researchers think this is where the unicorn legend actually started, especially since these animals were well known to ancient civilizations in the Middle East. But the real game-changer in the unicorn story wasn't a land animal at all. It was the narwhal, a whale species from Arctic waters. Male narwhals have this incredible spiraling tusk that can grow up to 10 feet long. It's basically a giant tooth that grows straight out through their upper lip. Now, these tusks started showing up in medieval Europe, and they became insanely valuable. We're talking worth more than a castle valuable. A single narwhal tusk could make you rich for life. Vikings and Norse traders obtained them from Arctic waters. Now we don't know if Vikings actively lied, passively allowed the misunderstanding, or even knew what Europeans believed. What we can say factually is that Vikings had exclusive access to narwhals. They sold the tusks to Europeans. They didn't explain what animal they came from. Europeans believed they were unicorn horns, and this continued profitably for centuries. When southern European merchants got their hands on these magnificent, spiraling ivory horns, they had no way of knowing what creature they came from. But the tusks matched the descriptions in those ancient Greek and Roman texts. They had that exotic mystique of coming from distant, mysterious lands. And most importantly, they were rare enough to be worth a fortune. But unicorn belief wasn't just about people misidentifying animals. There was a whole system keeping this belief alive, and once you understand it, you realize why it lasted so long. First, there's the authority problem. Medieval scholars treated writers like Aristotle and Pliny as basically infallible. If these great minds said unicorns existed, who were you to disagree? The whole academic culture back then was about preserving and interpreting ancient knowledge, not questioning it. Direct observation and experimentation? That wasn't really a thing yet. Second, and this is huge, money. By the Middle Ages, there was an entire economy built around unicorn horns. Rich people and royalty bought them as status symbols. They had them made into drinking cups and dining utensils because they believed these items could detect poison or neutralize it. And in an era when poisoning political rivals was a real concern, that protective quality made these horns worth their weight in gold, literally. Think about all the people who profited from this trade. Merchants bringing the horns from the north. Craftsmen making them into luxury items. Physicians prescribing powdered horn as medicine. Nobody wanted to admit that all these unicorn horns, filling European treasuries, were actually whale teeth. There was too much money at stake. And speaking of medicine, doctors became completely invested in unicorn horn as a cure-all. They called it alicorn, and powdered unicorn horn was prescribed for everything from plague to poisoning to epilepsy. Entire medical books discuss proper dosages and how to prepare it. When something gets that deeply woven into professional practice and economic systems, it becomes almost impossible to challenge. Third, consider how information traveled back then. If you lived in England and heard about a creature in India, you were never going to travel there yourself to check. You relied on authorities, on travelers' tales, on written records passed down through generations. This created a world where second-hand information, no matter how garbled or distorted, carried enormous weight. There was no way to fact-check. Christianity added another whole layer to this. Medieval theologians loved the unicorn as a symbol. They saw it as representing Christ. The single horn symbolized unity with God. There was this legend that unicorns could only be tamed by a virgin maiden, and theologians interpreted that as an allegory for the Virgin Mary and the Incarnation. This religious symbolism meant that questioning whether unicorns existed could feel like questioning religious truth. Unicorns showed up everywhere in Christian art. You'd see them in illuminated manuscripts, woven into tapestries, carved into church decorations. The famous Hunt of the Unicorn tapestries, made around 1500, show the creature in incredible detail, painted with the same care and attention as horses, dogs, and all the other real animals in the scene. Some scholars even thought they found unicorns in the Bible, though this was actually a translation mistake. The Hebrew word riem got translated as unicorn in some versions, when it probably meant wild ox or auroch. So how did the unicorn go from accepted fact to fairy tale? Slowly. Very slowly. The cracks started showing as European exploration expanded. More people traveled to distant lands and came back with detailed observations. Travelers to India reported seeing rhinoceroses, but nobody ever encountered that white, horse-like unicorn from the classical descriptions. The more people looked, the more the evidence didn't add up. In 1638, a Danish zoologist named Ole Worm published something revolutionary. He dissected a narwhal head and proved, definitively, that the so-called unicorn horns were actually narwhal tusks. He had the physical evidence. He showed exactly how the tusk grew from the whale's jaw. But even with this scientific proof, it took decades for people to let go of the belief. Centuries of conviction don't disappear overnight. The scientific revolution of the 17th and 18th centuries gradually changed the rules of the game. Scientists started demanding direct observation, repeatable experiments, systematic classification. Ancient authority wasn't enough anymore. When Carl Linnaeus created his famous taxonomy of all living things in the 18th century, classifying and naming thousands of species, the unicorn didn't make the list. By the 1800s, the transformation was complete. The unicorn had gone from documented animal to mythological creature, a symbol of medieval thinking that the modern world had supposedly left behind. Here's what I find fascinating about this whole story. Ancient people didn't believe in unicorns because they were dumb or superstitious. They believed because all the evidence they had, processed through the way they understood the world, made unicorns seem real. Think about what they had. Written accounts from authorities they trusted. Physical evidence in the form of actual horns they could touch and hold. An entire economic system built around unicorn products. Cultural and religious meaning attached to the creature. And they didn't have the global communication networks or systematic scientific methods that might have revealed the truth earlier. In a weird way, believing in unicorns was entirely logical given their circumstances. It shows us that false beliefs can persist not because people are foolish, but because those beliefs are supported by structures of authority, economic interest, and cultural meaning that make them incredibly hard to challenge. But here's something else to consider. The line between known and unknown is always shifting. Creatures we now know are real, like gorillas or giant squids, were once dismissed as ridiculous travelers' tales. The okapi, a real animal that looks like someone stitched a giraffe and a zebra together, wasn't discovered until 1901, and scientists initially didn't believe it existed. Our ancestors' unicorns were probably rhinos, oryx, and narwhals. Seen through a fog of distance, translation, and incomplete information. But their willingness to believe in creatures they never personally encountered reflected something true about the world. It's full of wonders we haven't discovered yet. The unicorn wasn't a failure of imagination. It was imagination trying to make sense of an incompletely known world. Everyone who believed in unicorns was doing the same thing we're still doing today, trying to figure out what's real in a universe far stranger and more diverse than any one person can fully understand.